Okay, good afternoon, all. We will start our class. Um, Now, there were a couple of things which I wanted to tell before I start my class, which are extremely very important with respect to the course that we are trying to deal in this particular semester. So, given that fact that this semester is going to be more or less an online semester, it is very important that we look into the other assessment aspects of this particular course, right? So with respect to that, certain quiz questions will be released today in your Google Classroom. The deadlines for the same will be set. You may have to attempt that and complete it. Similarly, assignment with respect to this particular course will be shared in the Google Classroom, right? The submission of the assignment is again into the Google Classroom itself. So I urge all of them who have not joined the Google Classroom to please join, take a help of your friends and join it, right? Because our medium of material exchange and other things will only be through this Google Classroom apart from this online class, right? So these are the two important things that I wanted to share before I start my class. One more thing is I have shared a link in the WhatsApp group about the AWS Online Summit, right? I hope most of you have seen that particular link, right? All of you, please register to this particular link, right? These are some of the ways that we can productively use with the current prevailing conditions which are happening in the society. Make sure that you join that online summit, right? In the last class, I had assured you about the Hadoop setup in the Hadoop setup and the lab in the next coming class, that is this week's class. But I unfortunately have two issues with the VMware and VM player. The systems that I'm trying to use currently at my home are less than 4 GB or are equal to 4 GB, and I'm not able to set it up in my laptop as well as my machines, right? So the other alternative thing, what I thought was I will set it up on the AWS cloud, right? And I think all of you have an access to the AWS cloud S3 account, right? If you log in through your DMS ID, email ID, you will be able to get some free credits to run the instances. At least minimally, you can at least run a Ubuntu instance, right? Long back, I had used this AWS instance for lab and other aspects. So I will try to give it a try again and share it with you tomorrow or in the coming days, right? So these are the things that I wanted to tell before I start my class, right? And with respect to whatever that we have covered so far, right? Starting from unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, unit 4, whatever it is, the assignments you will be typically based on the algorithm and its implementation in a Hadoop based environment, right? Since the topic basically discusses about big data analytics on Hadoop, right? You may have to implement the algorithm on a Hadoop based system and show its execution, right? So based on that, I will be listing out the topics of this particular course assignment. You may form a group of 3 maximum, not more than that, right? And put up your group details as well as the topic that you are trying to take from the list of topics that I put across in the Google Classroom, right? And this process is to be completed by a hard deadline before 20th of April 2020. There will be no extension that will be given after that, right? In case if you have not selected your assignments, I will assume that you are not interested to take up any assignment with respect to this particular course. Okay. So to begin with, I am sharing my screen here, right? Last class we had completed association analysis, right? Um, we had looked into association analysis with a priori algorithm, right? So today we will be looking into association analysis with FP tree system, right? So before we go into the FP tree, right, you should be aware that a priori algorithm works in a different way, right? It has certain advantages, certain disadvantages. For example, a priori algorithm makes multiple scans through the database, right? There are multiple read and write operations that are being performed, especially the read operations, to generate the candidate set every level, right? Candidate set L1, candidate set L2, L3 till Ln minus 1, whatever is the candidate sets that you are trying to generate, right? Each time a candidate set is being generated, so the database is to be scanned, the items is to be read, and then the candidate set is to be generated. So that is the reason why the complexity of an a priori algorithm is O of NLM to the power of n, right? So that is the complexity of the algorithm, right? Where n is the number of scans that you make, L is the exponential aspect 2 to the power of n, right? And n is the number of items that you are trying to talk about. It is the width of the number of items, the length of the database, right? And the overall complexity, which is 2 to the power of n, right? For the number of items that we are trying to discuss. So in both the terms of a space complexity as well as a time complexity, right? This is a very expensive job in case of a priori algorithm, right? Like as I said in the last class, if the item set is somewhere around 5 GB, the intermittent results and the files that are going to be created is more than 10 GB, right? You are expanding yourselves in terms of space as well as in terms of size, right? In terms of time as well. So this is a very expensive aspect. And when you talk about a real-time data sets, real-time data sets that comes from Walmart or Amazon or any other kinds of e-commerce site, the amount of data that it holds are in GBs or TBs, right? So if you typically apply an a priori algorithm on such kind of a situation, you may rather end up having results which are very delayed, and you may not see the results at a very faster pace. So this is some of the disadvantage in case of a priori algorithm, right? A priori was a very preliminary and a trivial algorithm for frequent item set mining, right? So having said that, with a lot of disadvantages and with respect to a priori algorithm, there was a need to understand the basis wherein which we reduce the computationally intensive activities and reduce the number of times that the IO operations that we do on a database scan, right? So for in with respect to that aspects, FP growth or an FP tree was introduced. Now this particular FP growth or an FP tree is a two-step process basically. It is scanning once, constructing tree on the other side, right? So it is compaction of data structures at one end and building of item sets on the other end. So it's a two-pass process, right? And it does not need the database to be scanned multiple number of times as the a priori does it, right? So this was a clear advantage with respect to whatever that a priori algorithm lacked, right? Now when you talk about big RAG servers that many of the institutions have, something like CDAC, and IISc has got a cluster of its own, right? Similarly, there's a lot of other academic and research institutions which are there in Bangalore have their own infrastructure to digest such kind of massive amount of data, right? So in such cases, a priori may do because your computationally intensive work is easily solvable. But when I slightly scale down to a smaller server or a smaller machines where I'm trying to consume a larger amount of data, so this may not work, right? I need a faster algorithm that can digest the data at a very a different rate and produce me a result at a faster rate. So this may be my targets which I can keep for the lower end machines when compared to these cluster machines which are there, right? So you must know that cluster machines are costly and they are expensive, right? They basically range from 40 lakhs and can go up to several crores, right? That is the aspect with these cluster missions, right? When I'm talking about a normal server that may be available within a span of less than 10 lakhs, or maybe even workstation missions which are ranging about 2 lakhs to 3 lakhs and so on, or even a lower end desktop missions which should be possible for me to run such kind of algorithms and try to test how it behaves and things like that, right? So the first phase of the FP tree construction is that you have the scanning of the data items from the database, right? So at the first step itself, right, whenever you are trying to scan the number of item sets and other things, there are two things that you are trying to do. One, you are categorizing this item set into two sets. One is that you are trying to categorize them as frequent sets. The other one, you are trying to categorize them as a infrequent set. Now, how do you categorize them? It is basically based on the count of occurrence of these items, as in when you keep scanning the items in a database table, right? Now, the second important point is, as per as the support count that is being given to me, whatever is the items which are least frequent or which comes below the support count, I would basically discard them at the first site itself, right? Unlike the case of a priori algorithm, which does the discarding of the infrequent sets, right, at the end of the generation of every candidate set generation, the FP tree does it at the first go itself, right? And then FP tree does one more important job. That is, it sorts the item in the descending order of their count, right? That is, it lists the items which are most frequently occurred against those which are least frequently occurred in a descending order. And all of these are above or equal to the minimum support count which is being mentioned by that particular problem, right? So this is the pass one of the FP tree construction, where several activities which are preliminary activities for item set, frequent item set generations, are easily carried out in this particular construction, right? And after this is being done, you get the output of the phase one, which is only the frequent item sets, right? Now, after this is done, the pass two of it is nothing but you create a node with respect to the frequent item set, right? As the name of the topic itself suggests, it's a frequent item tree, frequent pattern tree, FP tree, right? So if, since it is a tree, you will have to construct a tree like structure, which may be a binary, tertiary, or any kind of tree representation with respect to the frequent items what you have found from the database. Now, how do you do this construction? The construction is done in a specific manner, right? So every ordered transaction, whatever that is there, which overlaps between the shared transaction, there is link from one node to another node, right? Second is, the pointers are maintained between nodes that contain the same item, creating a singly linked list, dotted lines, right? And whatever is the paths that overlap with a higher compression, the FP tree tries to fit in within the memory requirement, right? You must know that all these algorithms that we do, when it is done on a clustered machine, the data is distributedly spread across all the other nodes, right? The data has to be taken from different nodes for doing some kind of processing, right? And FP tree has a very good ability to work on a distributed mode of operations, right? Which very clearly fits in the requirement of a Hadoop based system, right? So if someone is interested to do a MapReduce version of a FP tree, it is very well accepted, because this is one of the scope for you to improve the a priori lacuna and the limitations, right? So the frequent item sets are extracted from the FP tree once when it is constructed. So this is how the construction happens, right? let us go through this very step by step. So your starting node, whatever that you have got, is a null. The root of the FP tree is basically a null always. On the left hand side of this, you have got 10 transactions in your data set, right? And you have got different set of items in each of these data set. Now, the FP tree algorithm at the first step scans the database one after the other in a sequential manner. So after it scans, right, let's say that it scans the transaction T1. So the transaction T1 has got 2 items in it, which repeats only once, right? After reading the transaction T1, the tree would look something like this, right? You always start with the left node of the tree rather than starting with the right node of the tree, right? So the first transaction after it is being read, you add a node for A, you give colon and mention the count of it. Similarly, you give the node B for it and give a count for it. Now transaction T1 is completed. The next transaction what you have got here is the second transaction. Now that second transaction has B, C and D. Now for this particular null, that is the root of this particular FP tree, you have a right side child of this. The right side child, the first item which is being scanned from left to right is the item B, right, which is also seen in the transaction T1. So you would create a node B with the appropriate count that was seen in that particular transaction, and then you would give a dotted line connector from the transaction T1B to the transaction T2B. So this indicates, this edge indicates that this is an item which is being frequently seen. Now, after that, the remaining items in the transaction T2 or TID2 is C and D. You would create nodes with respect to C and D and update the count for it, right? The next transaction after completion of T2 is T3. T3 has got A, C, D and E. Now, typically in a binary tree structure, right, you only have a left child and a right child for it. You cannot create multiple childs for a binary tree. As the name itself says, there are only 2 wings that can come out of it. One is the left side, the other one is the right side for it. Now, because of this, what happens here is when the transaction 3 is being read, right, whichever is the items that matches with that particular transaction 3, the traversal happens to that particular node. So here you can see that the first item which is there in transaction 3 is A, right? So it goes to the left side of the tree, updates the count of A by 1, right? Next, the remaining items which are there in transaction T3 are C, D and E. Now C, D and E has already been created on the right side. So we cannot go there and do it because the tree traversal gets broken if you do that, right? So now what you do here is you create a right wing of this particular right child for this particular A. You update the item as C here. Count is 1. You give a dotted line representation to C, whichever was previously available in that particular tree. Similarly, it has got D. The same way it is being done. You have got E. So same way it is being done, right? So E is a new node which is being created here, and this is the count for it. Now, likewise, what you would basically do is at the end of every transaction, you keep creating, keep creating the number of nodes, right? You keep creating the expansion of that particular tree, and finally, after the end of the transaction 10 being read, your final tree appears like this, right? So where you can see the count associated with that particular item, right, at every level, right? So after that tree is being constructed, this is a very important thing that you note, the least frequent item sets are available here, right? If you can traverse through the leaf nodes of this particular FP tree, you can see that D is an item which is which is appearing here with the least frequency, right? E is another item which appears with the least frequency. So these are items which are basically excluded from the item set. The item set which has got with more frequency is A, then it is B, and then it is C. These are the items that are included in that particular item set. So you may ask me, sir, what is the how will the tree look like after I add the transaction tree 4, right? So look at this particular tree after the transaction tree T4, the count of A gets increased by 1, so A becomes 3 here. Now A does not have a child of B or D, right? The next item which is there here is D, right? So what you do here is you create another node, right? So you create another node, name it as D, right? You give a link of the previous D which was created to that particular D, and the other item after that is E. So you have created this. So ADE has repeated only once in that particular transaction set, right? And most of the other transaction appears with more number of A's in this. Right. So you can see here that the FP tree size is usually smaller in the uncompressed version of it, and occupies less amount of space when compared to the a priori algorithm, right? You can see that all transactions contain the same set of items, right? There will be one path to traverse in the FP tree, which is the frequent item set path, right? So this is the best case scenario of FP tree. That is all transaction containing the same set of items. So in our previous example, let's say that the transaction T1 to T10 all contains ABCDE, or all contains only ABC. So there is only one path in that particular transaction. What happens here? You can see that this is a tree, right? Here you can see that because all the 10 transactions have the items ABC, you can see that there is only single path. You add A here, you add B here, you create another node C. So the tree will only have the left side of that particular tree. You don't have any other items apart from that. So this is the best case scenario of the FP tree, which is a rare possible scenario, right? In a realistic scenario, you consider Walmart data or another thing. Is there a possibility that there are 10 transactions with the same set of items? May be possible, may not be possible, right? So the worst case scenario in a FP tree would be the case where in which all the 10 transactions or all the transactions have unique item set. So there are no items that are there in common at all. Now, how would this look like? So this would look like a null with 10 different um, level 2 nodes, right? So there is no binary concept that is being followed in the FP tree at all, right? It's a generic tree structure that is being followed. Now, you should know that whenever you are applying data structures for implementing such kind of scenario, right, you may apply singly linked list or you may apply doubly linked list for representing a tree structure in the memory, right? Now, when a worst case scenario comes into picture, right, just imagine the implementation of your linked list, right? Your head node in the linked list has got addresses of 10 different nodes which are connected with it, right? It stores the address of 10 different nodes, right? Now, this is the lacuna which comes in case of the worst case scenario, right? So the size of the tree basically depends on the items that we are trying to look at, whether the items are ordered, whether the items are in different way, whether the items have something in common. So these are the criterion which are used for understanding the size of the FP tree, right? So ordering by decreasing the support is typically used, but it does not always lead to the smallest tree that is possible. Hence, you have this name, something called as heuristic. This tree, whatever that you're trying to construct, is a heuristic tree, right? So there is no definitive approach that this tree is going to be like this only, right? For example, you have studied different types of trees in your data structure course or the algorithms course, right? Where you have studied about AVL tree, you have studied about red black trees, you have studied about B trees, you have studied about so many trees. There is a definitive procedure for construction of these trees. But in case of FP tree, the size or the viewable layout of that particular FP tree is not at all imaginable, right? It can be in any other formats. It depends on the item sets that are being available in that particular list of transactions. So this is a very, very important aspect of the FP tree. So the second step of the FP tree algorithm is the generation of frequent item sets. Now, till this time, what we have done, we have generated frequent items by the construction of FP tree. We have not constructed frequent item sets, right? So there is a vocabulary difference in these two terms. One is you are talking about frequent items. The other you are talking about frequent item set. Now, when the item set word comes here, it is a set of items that we are trying to refer to, which are frequently brought together. So this is the point of interest for our algorithm. So when you are talking about FP growth algorithm, right, with frequent item set algorithm tree, whatever that we are trying to construct, it is a bottom-up approach algorithm. That is, we read the item sets from the leaf node towards the root node, right? So from the leaves to the root is what we basically see, right? It's a typical divide and conquer approach, right? And you know that most of the divide and conquer approach are having a complexity of n log n or log n or whatever it is, right? Something similar to that. So which is fairly less complex when compared with the a priori algorithm, which whose complexity lies in exponential terms, right? So the way in which you are going to extract the paths, the way in which you are going to traverse this particular tree depends on the item sets, what you have constructed, items that are there in the transaction, how you have constructed it. And the second part of it is the implementation which comes in the linked list, right? So linked list, you can just imagine the tree being represented in a linked list, right? You can see that's the reason why I keep saying my lower semester students that you always have to look into hackerrank.com, right? Given the time that you have got ample amount of time, do not underutilize it, right? Utilize it for hackerrank.com. Try to solve challenges, right, which are harder, medium, and lower range. Especially the ranks gets upgraded when you solve a optimal solution for a harder problems, right? If you are able to give code for such kind of scenarios, right, it's a credit for you. You are able to upgrade your skills in the time of a lockdown and not wasting yourself with some other things, right? So you may as well do this. So you can see here, these are certain different examples which are being given here in this particular slide, right? And these examples are just trying to understand the path traversal or the prefix path traversal to for this particular node, right? So the reading happens from the leaf to the node, right? So the items, whatever that you get in this particular tree is DCBA, right? Or it is DBA, EDCA, right? EDA, right? Then you have got DCB, right? Then you have got ECB, right? These are the items that you get, frequent item sets that you get out of this particular scenario, right? Now, when you talk about the frequent item sets with respect to this, you are first of all removing those least item set. Now, what happens after you remove the least item sets, right? This is what happens, right? I will consider only those paths, right, which end up with node E, right? If I consider that particular scenario, the tree becomes like this, right? The tree becomes just like this. I will consider all those paths which are including the node D. So the tree looks like this. I will consider all those parts which are, I'm just trying to remove the leaf nodes one after the other here. I will consider all those parts which include C, right? Your tree looks like this. I will consider all those parts which contain node B, right? So the tree looks like this. I will consider all those parts which contains the node A, right? That is the only items that is left, right? So these are the principal subtrees that can be generated from this particular complete FP tree, right? So from this, you are trying to understand the frequent items which are being generated for that particular example. Okay, now how do you do this, right? So for each subtree, you prefix it with the leaf node, right? From the leaf node, you understand where the leaf node is trying to point to, right? It is trying to point to, for example, in case of E, it is trying to point to DE, right? It is trying to point to CE, right? And it is trying to point to AE and BE, right? Now, whatever that is being generated from DE is CDE, BDE, ADE. From CE, it is BCE, ACE. From BE, it is ABE. AE is already included in this, so you are not going to do it. So these are the item sets that you are trying to generate from this particular leaf node. So you are recursively trying to put the frequent item set with all possible combinations of E with the other item sets, right? So you are getting the items which are ending with at the second level ending with E, but with different items which are there in that. Similarly here ending with E, but two items preceded with that, prefixed with that. So this is the prefix path subtree process, which is again the approach required here is divide and conquer. So now you can also have conditional FP tree. Now what is this conditional FP tree? Let's say that you have a condition on a particular item, right? For example, this particular item should be sold, right? That means that particular item, whatever that we are trying to talk about in FP tree, is conditioned on that particular item. So you are going to remove all those transactions in this particular database which do not have that particular item set. For example, here there is a FP tree conditional on the item E. So in my database, the item, whatever is a transaction that excludes item E are being striked off, right? All those items which include E are taken into consideration and an FP tree is constructed with respect to that. Now this is a conditional FP tree, right? Conditional FP tree on that particular item set E. I am not including any other transactions like 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in this particular FP tree. So that is the aspect of conditional FP trees. Okay, for example, let us say that the minimum support count is 2. Now I should extract all the items which are with the minimum support count of 2, right? Containing the item set E. So in our previous example, we have seen the subtrees, right? The subtrees that contains the path of node E, right? So I'm just revisiting that particular tree where the node E appears in that particular FP tree, right? So these are the prefix path of E, right? That is, it goes with ED, EC, EA, EB, and so on. So the next thing is when you compare the performance analysis, right, of an FP tree versus an a priori algorithm, FP tree basically does much better in terms of the runtime complexity when compared with the a priori algorithm. You can see that there is an increase of the FP a priori algorithm runtime when compared with the FP tree. FP tree is almost linear when compared with this, right? Even the growth, whatever that we see, is has a large deviation curve when compared with the a priori algorithm, right? So FP tree is more suitable than the a priori algorithm. So here also, when you see the number of item sets per item set runtime, right? So it basically decreases with the support threshold in case of the FP tree, but in case of a priori, it still keeps increasing, right? You can see that it keeps increasing. Here, you can see that it almost comes to a constant. So with scalability with the DB size, that is the database size, right? The FP tree grows in a linear scale with a number of transactions. However, you can see that this line keeps going linearly upwards, right? That is almost exponential. So how do you do mining with a FP tree, mining with a association rule, right? Association a priori algorithm rule that we have already seen, right? Let's say that if the minimum support count is 50 and the minimum confidence count is 50%, right? You find out the frequent item set and calculate the support and the confidence for these items, right? So based on the support and confidence value, right? You basically find out which are all the items which are above that particular support and confidence item. For example, let's say that there is a rule starting from A to C, right? The people who brought the item A have also brought the item C, right? So for this particular rule, the support count is 50%, right? If you see the transaction ID, it is exactly 50%. There are 4 transactions. In 2 transactions, it appears. So it is 2 by 4, it is 50%. The confidence, again, it is A union C, it is 2, right? Out of 2, right, out of 3 where A appears, only 2 of the transactions C appears in that. So it is 2 by 3, which is 66%, right? So this particular rule is above the minimum and support and confidence count. Hence, it can be included as a association rule. So similarly, when you talk about a priori property, a priori property has got something called as anti-monotone property, right? So this anti-monotone property is basically trying to pass a particular test where the superset fails, the subset also fails for it, right? For example, let's say that ABC fails, then the subset involving A, B, and C also fails in the association rules, right? That is called as anti-monotone property. So the pruning step, we will not go through it because these are details which were presented in the last class, right? I will come to this particular slide, which is very important. The main issue for a frequent pattern mining is the scans, multiple database scans that is to be done for generation of frequent item set. So this is a costlier operation. It involves IO on a regular basis or frequent basis. Second, you may see that mining long patterns may need to have scanning at multiple phases, and it may also generate lot of candidate keys, lot of candidate items. Now let's say that there are items which are numbered from I1, I2, I3 till I100. The number of scans which are being done for this particular database is 100 scans, right? So the number of candidates which are going to be generated is somewhere around 2 to the power of 100 minus 1, which is 1.27 into 10 to the power of 30. So many number of candidate sets are generated. So the bottleneck is candidate generation and testing becomes very, very difficult, right? So this is a problem in case of frequent pattern mining, irrespective of what algorithm that we are trying to talk about. So this is what is frequent mining using FP tree that we have studied. So the next topic that we are going to look at is the SVM approach, support vector machine approach. Now, support vector machine comes with different models. It comes with a linear model and it comes with a non-linear model. It is basically a function of x, right? Where the x values can where the value of this particular function can range from 1 to -1, right? So the representation which is shown here, x bar, right? There is an arrow above the bar, which is the vector representation of it. If a scalar multiplication of two items, that is the weight and the b bar, x bar plus b is greater than 1, or w into x bar plus b is less than -1. So these are the two things that can come as an outcome of a linear model. So in a linear model, you are trying to find out determining the values of the data from the training data set. Okay. How do you learn a linear data set, linear SVM? The linear SVM, you can basically do two things. One is you can solve using Lagrange's multiplier method, or you can basically follow the values which are being given on the this particular formula. Margin is equal to 2 to the 2 divided by the W bar whole double bar, right? L of W bar is equal to W whole bar squared divided by 2, right? So these are the constraints for understanding the bound of that particular SVM function, right? This is also called as constraint optimization problem. Now let's take this particular example. So here you have got the values of x1, x2, y, and lambda value here. So let us try to concentrate on the columns of x1 and x2 and y. Now let's say that we apply these two data in that particular formula. This results in a positive 1, right? The other results in a positive negative 1. Likewise, we have got a series of 1 and -1, which are the outcome of the linear SVM function, right? So these are points which are represented in this XY plane, right? This is x1, this is x2 representation, and they are represented in different plane. Now the boundary conditions are the conditions which are related to this particular line, right? Falls in either the region of +1 or the -1 region, right? The items which are there above this are under the +1 categories. The data points which come below this particular support vector line, that is the lambda line, comes to -1 case, right? So this is the aspect of you can also see here in the table that whenever the x1 value is more and the x2 value is less, it leads to negative values. Whenever the x1 value is less than x2 value, it leads to a positive value. So thereby you can categorize this as -1 and +1, right? Again, the classification approach is what we are trying to do in case of SVM here. So when you are trying to learn about linear SVM, the decision boundary becomes very important. How do you construct this decision boundary? On what basis do you construct this decision boundary? Now, this decision boundary is constructed based on the support vectors. The support vectors are W and X. These are my support vectors, right? So based on the values of support vectors and based on the values of Xi, which is recorded in the test record, I basically construct the linear SVM boundary line. So you can have something like this. A support vector machine wherein which there is a linear boundary, linearly separable boundary, and there is also a linearly separable threshold boundary, right? In this particular example, you can see that there is a boundary which comes from one corner of this particular square to another corner of this particular square. You can also see that there is a threshold boundaries which are mentioned in dotted lines. So this is a positive threshold boundary. This is a negative threshold boundary. Something that comes above the line is positive. Something which comes below the line is negative. So you can see there are certain items. Now these items, data items, basically fall on either the threshold boundary or they are very close to the decision making boundary. Right? Now what is this decision making boundary? It is just trying to classify whether it is +1 or -1 category. Okay. So now the items which either fall on the threshold boundary are very near to that particular threshold boundary are to be classified. Right? Now, for example, you take this particular case, this particular data item is below this particular line. So this is very easy classification. Look at this. This is a classification wherein which it lies just above the threshold boundary. So whether the categorization should be made as -1, +1 is an ambiguous thing here. Look at this. This is again a data point which lies exactly in between the threshold boundary and the actual boundary. There are items which are above the threshold boundary which are easily demarked. There are items which are exactly on the positive threshold boundary, which is again a confusion whether it is to be marked as positive or should be marked as negative. Now this is a problem which is not a linearly separable items. When the items are not linearly separable, the support vector machine introduces a variable called a slack variable, which is represented in this particular thing, right? So the slack variable will decide whether this data item, to be included in either of these categories or is to be excluded in either of these categories. Right? The objective of this SVM is to look at only the linear separations, classification. Okay. So you can see here that there are boundaries and there is a margin boundary. Now, how did you calculate this margin boundary? You calculated the margin boundary using this particular formula. Similarly, you can also see that there are items which are being there with respect to this. Right? For example, if the boundary line is B1, right, the threshold factors are B11 and B12. Similarly, there is another threshold boundary which is B2. Right, another boundary which has been created. The threshold boundaries for this is B21 and B22. Right? So if I create multiple decision boundaries, I would like to see a particular scenario where I can do an optimality of this particular classification, which may be an optimized solution for this particular classification. That is what I am basically looking at in this particular scenario. Right? More the number of boundaries, more is the opportunity for me to understand the optimization of the classification factors. There are non-linear support vector machines. Now in the non-linear support vector machines, I cannot include a decision boundary line as I have included in case of linear SVM. There is no way that the non-linear SVMs will have classifications with linear boundaries. So in order to calculate the classification here, the formula what is being used is y of x1 comma x2. The class again is +1 and -1. For the calculation of positive one, it is square root of x1 minus 0.5 the whole square plus x2 minus 0.5 the whole square greater than 0.2. Otherwise, it is minus 1 category. This is how the decision is being made for the negative boundaries. So you can see here, right? When a data is in a highly dimensional data, right? You can see that the decision boundaries are made in a non-linear fashion, right? Right? You can see that there are these items which are densely populated, these items which are sparsely populated in the dimensional space, right? And based on the different calculations, whatever that you've done, you calculate the decision boundary for this particular scenario. So what are the issues in nonlinear SVM? The issues is with respect to mapping function. The issues is with respect to the computation of high dimensional space. The issue is with respect to the computation of this particular dot product. Okay. And again, the curse of dimensionality, which is very important, right? As I said, there may be hundreds of different dimensions for the same data set, right? When there are more number of dimensions which are used for analysis, it becomes a problem in the classification and early data mining steps. So the characteristics of SVM is that SVM is a learning algorithm which is a convex optimization problem, right? The overfitting is addressed by margin and the decision boundary. Difficult to handle missing values, right? Which is to be taken in the pre-processing stage. Robust to the noise. High computational complexity for building the model. Construction of model is complex. Usage of model is very simple. Right? Again, this is again an opportunity for all of us to use SVM on Hadoop-based systems. Right? This is also one of the cases where MapReduce version of SVM is not so easily available. You need to code for that and get the solution for it. Okay, so these are some of the topics which are very important and computationally very important to pursue such topics under Hadoop MapReduce based systems. Okay, so the next topic that we come into is the social network analysis. Right, when you look into the general aspect of social network analysis, this is used for a lot of analytic techniques meant for different things. Just like the case on a real-time scenario, you are trying to find out the contact of COVID with other personnel. The spread of an epidemic or a pandemic disease like this spreads in a form of a network, right? One spreads to another, the other may spread to a community may spread to another community. So it keeps going on like this, right? That is the aspect. So similarly, when you analyze a social network, right, the social network is a very complex model, right? So you are trying to analyze the social media with the social network with a mathematical and a graphical perspective to understand how this particular scenario holds. So to begin with, what is social network? Now there are different authors who have defined social network in different ways. Wasserman has defined social network perspective encompasses theory, model, application that are expressed in terms of relational concepts and processes. The relations are defined by linkages among units or fundamental components. Likewise, you can see that there are different authors who have defined the social network in different ways, right? So it is not a concrete definition when you look into for any of these topic network. So the networks, different types of social networks are personal network, which are basically ego-centered networks defined at the individual level, behavioral networks, which are represented as a socio-technical systems activity, something similar to LinkedIn, research, academia.edu, and so on. Organizational networks, right, networks within a particular within an organization. Then you have online social networks, example of Facebook, Twitter, and Orkut, so many other cases which are represented. So these are the different perspective of a social network. So what are the elements of a social network? The elements of a social network is actor is an element. Actor is a discrete individual or a corporate or a collective social unit which is represented as a node or a vertex. An individual may be a Facebook friend. He may be the actor may be a corporate, which may be representing companies, government agencies, universities, collective social units. They may be represented as a node in a particular graph. The actors represents the tie generating before they are flexibly being interpreted. Right? These are all quotes. These are all things which are directly taken from the author Wasserman and Frost, 1994. Since I wanted to give the courtesy to this particular author because whatever is the definition which is being taken as per this particular person is strictly taken in a concrete fashion, right? There is no change in the definition at all. These are all standard definitions. So the second element is a relational tie. First is an actor who is represented as a node or a vertex. Second is a relation tie, which basically connects a node to another node, right? So this can be directional, weighted. It can also be a line, arc, or an edge. Now, a relational tie basically represents liking or friendship, what we see in the social network, transfer of resources, association or affiliation, behavioral interactions, movement between places, physical connection, formal relations, biological relationships. Okay, for example, the relational tie may be father and son who are there in Facebook, right? That may be a biological relationship, right? So these are the different types of relational tie that can exist between two nodes, between nodes. There can also be complex ties. A complex tie is one which is an undirected line. An arc is which is a directed line. A loop is a line that ties the vertex to itself. Multiple is a directed arc occurring multiple number of times. So the graph types based on this may be a simple directed graph with no directional ties, loops, and multiple lines. Simple graph with no multiple lines, or a network which is a complex graph. So whatever that you see on this side is not a novel coronavirus, right? It is a complex graph which is connecting different nodes, including complex ties. So the elements of social network are grouping, right? This is a very important topic, right? So the power of a network analysis is the ability to model the relationship and group the nodes, group the system of actors, right? So this is a very important activity, right? For example, dyad is a relationship between two actors. Triad is a three actors with a potential tie within. Subgroup, a larger group within the group of actors within a network. Group is a finite collection of actors. Partition, a collection of assignment categorical values. So these are the ways in which you can basically understand the grouping. Right? It may be two nodes which are connected, that is two actors which are connected. It may be three actors which are connected. It may be group of actors which are connected. It may be a larger group of finite collection of actors who may be connected. It may be a technical or some kind of a partition which may be created. Likewise, uh, you have different ways of grouping. Right? These are categorical partitions are the largest form of grouping. So the elements of a social network are three things now. The elements of social network are actors, the relationship ties, and the groupings. Right? So these are the connection between the actors, ties, and grouping in a social network. So what kind of social network data are we trying to deal with? What kind of representations are we trying to deal with? So this is a complex graph representation. So the type of social network can be one mode social network, relationship that exists between single set of actors, or two mode networks, or a two mode networks with affiliation. So one mode network is something like marriage network between people, transaction between companies, movement between places. Two mode networks, donor relationship between companies, corporations and organizations. Affiliation, something like membership clubs, right? You have got membership clubs in IEEE, right? Then you have got membership clubs in CSI, something. These are all affinity groups, right? Participation as board of directors, right? This is a affiliation kind of a network. So when you see different kinds of social networks, the first one is a egocentric or a personal centric network. Here, the focus is on actors who alter the connection between them, right? So there are different surveys which were conducted with respect to this, right? And there were different representations which were given for relationship of a personal network, right? These may be family, relatives, right? Connected people, and so on. Analytical techniques is by understanding how do you collect the data for social network data, right? So the possible ways is personal network questionnaires, position generators, administrative records, organizational charts, secondary analysis, socio-technical systems, right? This keyword socio-technical systems are very important. Socially technically systems, right? For example, there may be systems which cater a patient in an ICU, right? There may be systems which cater handicapped people, right? There may be recently we had that IEEE webinar wherein which Professor William Lee from NUS Singapore was talking about unmanned vehicles, right? Autonomous vehicles, where you are having uh, um, wheelchair autonomous wheelchair for handicapped patients, where it will basically drive by itself, understanding the object distance and other things. So these are some of the very important socio-technical systems of this age today. Now again, when we look at this analytical technique, you are supposed to do a social network data analysis. Now, how do you do data analysis? It is a simpler representation in terms of edges and vertices, right? If you go back to your algorithms that you have studied in algorithms, that is your Ford-Fulkerson algorithm, Dijkstra's algorithm, right, Prim's algorithm, and so on, you can understand that there were representations which are given in terms of adjacency matrix, right? Adjacency lists, right? So the first one is an adjacency list here. The second one is an adjacency matrix. For example, in an adjacency list, if there is an edge that is falling from 1 to 2, right, it is represented as 1, right? And since the matrix is symmetric, 2 to 1 is also represented as 1. Then you have 1, 3, right? 1, 3 is represented here. Again, 3, 1 is also represented. Then you have 3, 2, right? 3, 2 is represented here. 2, 3 is also represented here. Now, this is a symmetric adjacency matrix. Now, the symmetric adjacency matrix is represented for undirected graphs, where the connection may be in both the directions, right? It's a dual direction graphs. So, you can see that when we were implementing adjacency matrix in Prim's or Kruskal's algorithm, right? If there is no edge between one node to another node, it was represented with 0 or minus 9999 or something like that, right? So here it is simply represented as dash, but in the actual implementation details, it may be given some other value. So there are different analytical techniques which are available as softwares for software network, social network analysis. So these are some of the popular packages, right? So these are popular packages which are available to understand and do some kind of a conclusion with um, these packages. Some of them are web tools, some of them are packages, softwares which can be installed, and you can do a analysis with social network. So when you're trying to analyze a social network, the basic property of the social network is descriptive statistics. How many actors are there? How many ties are there? What is the degree of their association? How many ties that each actor have? Right? For example, if I take my Facebook profile, there are 800 people or 1000 people connected to my node. That is the degree of centrality, right? Similarly, every node in a social network has a degree of connectivity, right? The lines that connect from that particular account to another account, right? So betweenness centrality, connectivity property that connects the actor, hub, and authorities are partitioned groups. Closeness centrality, which basically understands the path length between actors. Network centrality, average path that is used to traverse the network in a shorter and better manner. So these are some of the cases of how you basically deal with um, the social network analysis. Right. Next, network properties. Right. There, if you take a complex network, right, as one which is being shown in this particular slide, right, the degree centrality, the closeness centrality, and all the other metrics are measurable metrics of this network property. For example, let's say that you are doing a block modeling. The block modeling is to examine the relationship between classes of vertices. So the blocks are basically block 1, block 2, block 3, block 4. These are different categories of actors. Now, for each of these actors, the network centrality or the closeness centrality is measured with certain formula, right? You can see that there are values which are there, right? And that values are represented either as zeros and ones. So the zeros and ones basically interact that categories of actors are not interactive with the other categories of actors. or they are remote friends. So a random graph comparison, when you try to do, right, it allows different partitions to combine with the different other partitions. This is an example of a StatNet tool, which is in R language, right? I'm not so well acquainted with R language, but this is the outcome of that R language is what this particular slide basically tries to talk about. So when you summarize the personal networks are actors, ties, and relationships. Modes are one mode or two modes. Measures are the number of connections. Instruments are the name generation, position generation, and scales. The outcome is the social support, social capital, and host of others. Now, why is this personal network so important to understand? It is better to understand because there are lots of activities that we do with respect to this personal network, right? So there were different studies which were basically suggested, right? This has been a very long discussion of social network studies, right? We use the social network study even for cybersecurity criminology, right? Trying to understand who was the friend of the other, what was his role in a particular crime or something like that, right? There are so many other cybercrime scenarios where social network analysis is made use of extensively, right? And several case studies which are being presented with respect to social network analysis. So these are some of the resources which are available, right, with respect to social networks, right? SOCNet, CITANet, right? Then INSINA, Sunbuilt, right? Some of the conferences, recommended text which is from different major authors, right? One which with respect to this is very, very important texts which are being highly recommended for understanding about social network analysis. Okay, I would like to stop this particular class at this particular moment. And open up this forum for any kind of doubts with respect to this particular subject, right? And very importantly, the assignment and quiz, you may have to keep a track on it. It is being regularly being updated from now on the Google Classroom. Please keep an update on it. Ask your friends to join to this particular Google Classrooms.